But let's start with number one, which is the freshest in my mind because I just read the judgment, and I don't know what Cuba Gooding Jr. is thinking. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, it's been in the news, so I don't think Cuba Gooding Jr. is going to say that he's unaware of the lawsuit anymore. Cuba Gooding Jr. was sued civilly for a crime of a sexual nature of the most egregious kind. He was sued in 2020. The event allegedly took place in 2013. From what I understand, the plaintiff, who is unnamed, and we're going to get to that, I don't think she filed criminal charges. I may be wrong, but you'll correct me, Robert. She filed a civil suit in 2020, anonymously, asked for permission of the court to remain anonymous, asked for permission of the court to, I guess scrub is the wrong word, but close enough, documents which contained her name so she could retain anonymity. And then when Cuba Gooding Jr. failed to appear or neglected or failed to appear, and that is formally announced that he's going to defend, that he intends on defending, that he's got a lawyer. A year later, she filed a motion for judgment by default. There was a procedural issue where she was her lawsuit was dismissed without prejudice. You'll explain to me why, but it was dismissed without prejudice. She refiled, continued default, got permission to serve Cuba Gooding Jr., served in accordance with that judgment, failure to appear, respond, whatever, and the judgment that was rendered against him granted her motion to remain anonymous, to scrub her name from certain documents, and judgment by default, monetary damages to be awarded later at a hearing in September. I don't think I missed anything there, but explain to me, just the first question that I had reading this judgment was why her lawsuit was dismissed without prejudice in the first place and what that meant.
So she filed the suit, I think, right on the eve of the pandemic, and then didn't follow up, didn't attempt to serve the suit. So it was initially dismissed for failure to prosecute by her. And I think it references it as being a her. And then the plaintiff, and then and so that's why. And so but they allowed her to reinstate her claim and then serve him. And when he did not respond, the court issued a relatively quick default judgment against him. But one of the things he'll have grounds to try to set aside the default judgment. But there's an increasing use of default judgments in some problematic ways. I was involved many years ago in a default judgment case against Pepsi that the courts were eager to set aside, even though there was no good grounds to set aside, just because of the size of the judgment and because of who Pepsi was. So we'll see whether the courts step back from that. There's all kinds of grounds to set aside a default judgment, but courts are getting a little tougher at allowing that to occur. But notably, one assumption is a default judgment automatically means the monetary amount is assessed. For due process reasons, that's not supposed to happen. There's supposed to be a separate, what they call a prove-up hearing. And the judge in the case has ordered a prove-up hearing in September and basically implied that if he doesn't appear for that then, of the millions of dollars that the plaintiff wants will be received. The case is a reaffirmation of the right to file suits anonymous, the rights that you shouldn't have to forfeit your right to privacy in order to get relief in the legal system. I filed the Covington boys cases as all anonymous for the same reason. And it was good to see reaffirmation of that. But otherwise, it's a reminder that you get served a suit, you should get a lawyer, particularly if you're Cuba Gooding and you might owe millions of dollars otherwise. Only other caveat is I think this case, we don't know because we don't know the plaintiff. This case may be related to a prior criminal case that ultimately did not lead to his conviction. But it's a little peculiar that he didn't respond. But sometimes with celebrities, I'm very curious about what the service of process really was. Was it on him? Was it on somebody else that didn't get the message? But sometimes this happens with celebrities. They're so hard to reach and they're so protected that they don't know that they've been sued for millions of dollars and might be on the $1 million losing end of it, as Cuba Gooding right now looks to be.
So just to address one comment that someone said, the defendants or the accused have the right to confront their accusers. It was stipulated in the judgment. The judge said Cuba knows who the person is, so there's no reason to make it public for the rest of the world. So it's not like Cuba, he's not facing an anonymous, what's the word, blacked out type face type thing. He knows who it is because her name appeared in certain documents that were served on Cuba. They just want to have this not made public. And the reasons are pretty clearly set out. I mean, this is a high profile case. The woman's going to lose all anonymity. The plaintiff is a woman, given the nature of the allegations, which involve certain types of assault. And so this is the question now. Everyone looks at this and says they're going to come to their own conclusions. Cuba got served. He decided to ignore because it was so frivolous. He didn't get served because he's trying to dodge service. He didn't get served because he couldn't be found. And he is a celebrity. They are behind multiple layers of protection. He may never have known this lawsuit even existed in the first place. Now he certainly knows. Doesn't matter. End of the day, if this is anything like it is under Canadian law, he will have a chance to come in front of a judge and say, look, I never knew this lawsuit existed. Other than the delays, no prejudice in striking this judgment or bringing us back to square one. I intended to defend. Obviously, I wanted to. And so, what's the word? Strike the decision, granting the judgment by default, and let's contest this and we'll agree to an expedited hearing. More likely than not that happens.
It should, unless I've seen some tendencies recently with judges being harsher about that, but the law is supposed to be, and this is a federal decision, but the law almost everywhere is that the law abhors a default, that the law prefers to have the merits determined and decided. And so here he didn't appear for a couple of weeks within the time frame. It was one of the fastest default judgments I've ever seen issued. So that would make you a little concerned about where the judge's mindset is. But my assumption is if he retains counsel, he'll move almost immediately to set aside the default judgment, not just go to the evidentiary hearing on the prove-up side of the equation. He's going to contest everything. But and there's often good grounds to do so. But it can be tricky. It's always a risk not to appear or file something on time.
And there were references. I mean, this is in the context of Cuba Gooding Jr.'s broader criminal and social media accusations. Like some of them are criminal, some of them are just where the battles are being taken now. It's in that context. In that context, people are going to say, yes, it's a legit plaintiff. Others are going to say it might be someone who's being an opportunist, trying to exploit that context for the purposes of ill-founded accusations so they can seek a monetary award. We know nothing of the evidence right now. Thus far, it's the lawsuit that was served, allegations that Cuba was validly, duly served, but did not respond, and therefore that justified the judgment by default. So people out there can think that Cuba Gooding Jr. was not sitting there hearing a bailiff knock on his door and refusing to answer. There are circumstances in which valid service can still be slipped into a mailbox, stapled to a door. I mean, there are forms of service that people don't know exist, Robert.
Yeah, and in particular with celebrities, they may have had an agent of some type at their known residence accept service of process and then not relay the information or documentation onward. It's very hard to see why he would not appear at all. That just doesn't make much sense. Particularly, I mean, right now he has a judgment against him for the kind of thing you don't ever want a judgment issued against you for. So I don't see what his motivation would be to actually not show up in the case. My assumption is that something just slipped through the cracks for some reason. But it shows, the important. Someone in his position really should have, lawyers on cue that are always notified of any legal action, or even, tracking filings in state and federal courts. Lawyers can do that if they can track by party, depending on the state. Some states don't have the best records, but all federal courts do. So if someone was just tracking each day to make sure his name wasn't showing up somewhere, they would have caught it too. He clearly didn't have the best protective team around him, and that's why he's in the jam he's in right now.
Yeah, it's because for anybody who might be thinking, I think it was actually McAfee who said, I'm not going to defend against certain things because it's not worth my time. But this is not the type of thing anyone makes a strategic decision to ignore. These are the most serious accusations, which, okay, fine, not criminal. I'm reading all of the favorable media, BuzzFeed, what was the one, Variety. Yeah, it's not a criminal condemnation. It's just a civil condemnation, as if anybody wants a civil condemnation on the record, even if your damages are $1, that this is a judgment by default.
Not for this. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the Me Too world reacts to all of this. Because right now, Cuba Gooding has a judgment against him for sexual assault. That's the reality. I mean, and that's why it has broad impact beyond whatever the monetary amount ends up here or whether he gets it set aside or not. His career is in jeopardy by not responding in a timely manner.
All right, now that's about it for that. I mean, we'll see what happens. I suspect they're gonna undo the judgment by default because it's as a matter of pure equity. If he announces now, I want to defend, but I didn't know, any normal judge would do that without making it too hard. We'll see. To be continued, I guess.